The federal election will be here before you know it, and there are some key issues that will need wise and godly decisions from our next Prime Minister. Joining us from New Brunswick to chat about this is Faytene Grasseschi. She is the host of the Faytene TV program, which airs nationwide, including right here on Miracle Channel and on our partner station, Merit TV Canada. She has also been involved in Canadian politics, running for public office, coming very close to winning the New Brunswick riding of Hampton Fundy St. Martin's in the 2024 provincial election. Faytene, it's great to have you with us.
Oh, it's such a joy to be here. Thank you for taking time for me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, Faytene, a lot of folks believe that this particular federal election is perhaps one of the most important ones in Canadian history. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I think 2021 and 19 were also very, very significant. What we see happening here is, a landscape that is really coming down to about 30 to 50 ridings in each one of our elections, clear divides across our nation on a variety of issues. And these are defining moments. There are parties that have very different visions for the future of our nation. And so, how voters mark their ballot will be very consequential.
And voter turnout in federal elections isn't usually super high, and that also seems to be the case when specifically looking at the voter turnout for the Christian community. What's stopping Christians from getting involved, and how can they get more involved?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I have actually seen analytics that have shown that voter participation is actually beginning to surge. As a matter of fact, in advanced polling, there has been, in terms of advanced ballots, excuse me, being marked, there's been a very high number of Canadians that have participated. I think as of about a week ago, there was pushing 150,000 ballots that had already been marked. In terms of the faith community, sometimes I think perhaps maybe when it's been easy for a while, not saying that it's been easy the last couple of years, we tend to maybe disengage, let other people take the wheel. But I think that's shifting. I think with the level of economic trauma that many of us have experienced nationally, across the nation, and several of the other issues that Canadians care deeply about, I expect a real surge in engagement. And I think we'll see that reflected on the 28th.
Now, if we want to see revival in Canada, then it makes sense to fight for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But some of these freedoms are being threatened by potential political legislation. We talked earlier about some budget recommendations, and one of them includes removing charitable status for organizations that want to advance religion.
Yeah, yeah, this is very alarming, I think. I think this is rattling a lot of people. Now, to be clear, this isn't at the legislative or has didn't reach the legislative stage, but in December of 2024, there was a committee, the Standing Committee on Finance, that adopted over 300 recommendations, and in that bundle was the recommendation for the removal of charitable status for the purpose of the advancement of religion as a charitable objective. So, what this means practically is if this recommendation, which was put forward by a liberal led committee, was actually adopted into legislation, if this is rolled out in its purest form as recommended, it would mean that churches and Christian ministries all across Canada would not only lose their ability to give a tax receipt, but when an organization loses their charitable status, they have to dissolve their assets as well and give it to a qualified donee. So that would mean organizations like the Miracle Channel would have to sell their building, give it to a qualified donee. If there's any cash in the bank account, maybe you have a contingency fund to pay your staff for the next couple months, that would also have to be given to another qualified donee, which in most situations, this means that staffing is going to be fired and there will be a complete collapse of those charitable operations until that charity can figure out how to continue to function in a monetized way. So it would be a massive hit to the charitable sector across Canada, not only impacting the Christian community, but also the Jewish community. Every religion across our nation would be impacted. So this is a pretty big deal that it was even recommended. And so, really, this is a time for Canadians, number one, to have this on their radar, but number two, to be speaking with their candidates about it, no matter what party they're from. When they come knocking on your door, ask them, if this actually gets to the floor of the House of Commons, how would you vote on the revocation of charitable status for religious organizations? It would be extremely consequential. And I will just say one other thing on this. There have been extensive studies about this in terms of the social impact of the charitable sector. And a recent study by Cardis under the Halo Project showed that for every $1 that's donated to a faith-based charity, there is a 3.49 dollars worth of benefit that is given back to the immediate community that that charity functions in. So this would not only be a hit to the faith community, faith communities, but it would also be a hit to communities all across the nation of Canada. So it's a pretty big deal.
That is shocking. Wow. Now, before calling the election, former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had proposed changes to the Income Tax Act, like to remove charitable status from not just religious organizations, but also pro-life pregnancy crisis centers. And this looks like this has already passed.
Yeah, so they were right out of the gate with that in 2021. That was actually a part of Justin Trudeau's policy platform at the time, if I'm remembering correctly. And then late last year, Chrystia Freeland and another federal cabinet minister actually made an announcement that they were implementing this. I did recently speak to the head of Pregnancy Care Canada, which basically helps give support to pregnancy care centers all across the nation that are serving women in crisis pregnancy situations. They did tell me that they're not aware yet of a situation where the revocation of charitable status has actually happened. But the press conference was made, and allegedly the rollout is happening. So we'll see we'll see. Where this all goes, but there does seem to be a real intent in this direction.
Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Canadians witnessed serious government overreach with the enactment of the Emergencies Act, and the many workers and even some children were mandated by the government to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Bodily autonomy should be protected in Canada, should it not?
Oh, I would absolutely agree. And conscience rights, particularly, I know a lot of Canadians felt deeply uncomfortable with taking the vaccine, not because they don't trust vaccines or they're anti-vax, but because it was just so rushed, right? It was such a rushed situation. And we do know that Stats Canada has actually recorded that there have been adverse incidents. And this is a real thing. So I think when there is a risk, there should always be informed consent and the ability to opt out if a Canadian feels uncomfortable with it. And also, I would also say physician conscience rights and nurse practitioner conscious rights. And anybody that's implicated in the process should be able to function with their conscience intact. That would be my strong opinion on that. And thankfully, we do have some members of parliament and provincial legislators as well that agree. And I know, for example, I believe it was in Manitoba a few years back, there was legislation passed when it comes to physician conscious rights on other issues. And so, this is something that Canadians can engage with our leaders with both on the federal level and the provincial level. And I would encourage them to do so.
Yeah, so are there any parties who would be more inclined to protect the conscience rights of medical professionals?
I have not heard anything explicitly in this current federal campaign, though I do know there are members of parliament that were sitting in the Conservative caucus previously. We'll have to see if they get elected again, like Kelly Block, for example, that put forward a private members bill. She put forward a private members bill, excuse me, on if I'm remembering correctly, physician conscience right bill. And so there definitely is a sentiment within the Conservative caucus with some members of parliament, but we'll have to see on the other side who gets elected and what they decide to move forward.
And then MAID, medical assistance in dying, that's an ongoing concern in Canada with the possibility of our next federal government choosing to allow MAID based solely on the state of an individual's mental health. Are our federal parties moving one way or another on this issue?
This is a very important discussion because when medical assistance in dying was rolled out back around 2016, this was one of the concerns that was raised. And that was, is this going to continue to broaden and broaden? And at that time, Canadians were assured by our elected officials that medical assistance in dying would only be for the terminally ill and those that were expected to die within the foreseeable future, within a short distance in the front, and that there would be protections, that there would be many safeguards. And it just seems like the further that we've gotten, the more those safeguards have been stripped away. You can now have medical assistance in dying potentially administered within a 24-hour period. The foreseeable terminal illness clause has now been removed. If somebody is experiencing what is defined as intolerable suffering. Even if their death is not imminent, they can request medical assistance in dying. Of course, we've heard horrific stories of medical assistance in dying being offered to those who are disabled, those that are struggling with affordable housing, with our veterans. And so, some of the things that people were signaling as concerns right back then at the beginning have actually rolled out. So in 2027, there's a possibility that this could be broadened even more, as you mentioned, with medical assistance in dying being made available for the mentally vulnerable and possibly for mature minors. And so this is a real concern. And this is something that the international community is watching and actually signaling to the international community, pointing to us saying, hey, don't do what Canada's doing because it has gone too far. And so, when even advocates in the international community are pointing to Canada as the way not to do it, I think that that's something that our elected officials should be paying attention to, and Canadians should be talking to our leaders about.
Absolutely. I mean, gone are the days when everyone looks to Canada and like, oh, what is Canada doing? And it's certainly changed, and I've felt it too. But we know Canada's debt also has grown under the Trudeau Liberals, and for Albertans, the easy answer to generating revenue is build pipelines and get our resources out to market. However, politicians in central Canada have stood in the way and prevented that from happening. Now, there's even major rumblings of Western separation. Your thoughts on this?
Oh, I think it's a very, very real, I guess I'll use the word threat, to the nation. But I also understand it. Canadians from Alberta and Saskatchewan have felt economically abused, disrespected, and disregarded. We see, the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith experiencing mockery. And there's just this tonality of disrespect. I appreciate the strength that Premier Danielle Smith is bringing to the table, though. Of course, she gave that ultimatum on March the 20th to Mark Carney, saying that whoever's elected, these are our list of demands. If these things aren't dealt with within the first 6 months, we are looking at, in her words exactly, we're an unprecedented national unity crisis. As somebody who lives in Eastern Canada, but I'm originally from Alberta, this breaks my heart. I have so much appreciation for the hard workers of our energy sector there in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, and I believe that they deserve respect. And so, I, like many Canadians, are very hopeful that we will get an administration federally that will respect Alberta going forward. Or, I think the predictions are very valid that we could see a move towards, if not separation, at least sovereignty, similar to what Quebec did in 2006. And it's real. It's very real.
So, lastly, what kind of character traits should Canadian voters be looking for in a prime minister?
Well, I think consistency is important. Not that leaders can't evolve or change their mind on an issue if they get more information. But one thing that I've been noticing, at least with Mark Carney, is particularly when it comes to the development of our natural resource sector. He seems to say one thing in BC, another thing in Quebec, one thing in English, another thing in French. And I don't know if it's just because he's trying to find his way or what's going on here. But to me, that causes me to put a question mark. And so I think it's important that leaders say what they mean what they say. You know, integrity is a thing, and that builds confidence, obviously, in our hearts as the electorate. And this is really one of the things that I'm personally watching for is where is that integrity factor, because that's the leader that we can trust.
Faytene Grasseschi is the host of the Faytene TV program, which airs right here on Miracle Channel and as well on our sister station, Merit TV Canada. Faytene, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, I've loved the conversation. Thanks for having me.